Chapter 3, The Delhi Sultans. In Chapter 2, we saw that regions like the Kaveri Delta became the center of large kingdoms. Did you notice that there was no mention of a kingdom with Delhi as its capital? That was because Delhi became an important city only in the 12th century. Take a look at Table 1. Delhi first became the capital of a kingdom under the Tomara Rajputs, who were defeated in the middle of the 12th century by the Chauhans, also referred to as Chahmanas of Ajmer. It was under the Tomaras and Chauhans that Delhi became an important commercial center. Many rich Jain merchants lived in the city and constructed several temples. Coins minted here, called Dehliwal, had a wide circulation. The transformation of Delhi into a capital that controlled vast areas of the subcontinent started with the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate in the beginning of the 13th century. Take a look at Table 1 again and identify the 5 dynasties that together made the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultans built many cities in the area that we now know as Delhi. Look at map 1 and locate Dehli-i-Kuana, Siri and Jahanpana, the rulers of Delhi. Rajput dynasties, Tomaras, early 12th centuries to 1165. Ananga, Pala, 1130 to 1145. Chauhans, Prithviraj Chauhan, 1175 to 1192. Early Turkish rulers, 1206 to 1290. Kutubuddin Aibak, 1206 to 1210. Samsuddin Iltutmish, 1210 to 1236. Rajia, 1236 to 1240. Ghiyasuddin Balban, 1266 to 1287. Khalji dynasty, 1290 to 1320. Jalaluddin Khalji, 1290 to 1296. Alauddin Khalji, 1296 to 1316. Tughlaq dynasties, 1320 to 1414. Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, 1320 to 1324. Muhammad Tughlaq, 1324 to 1351. Firuz Shah Tughlaq, 1351 to 1388. Sayyid dynasty, 1414 to 1451. Khizar Khan, 1414 to 1421. Lodi dynasty, 1451 to 1526. Wahlul Lodi, 1451 to 1489. Finding out about the Delhi Sultans. All the inscriptions, coins and architecture provide a lot of information. Especially valuable are histories, Tariq singular, Tariq plural, written in Persian, the language of administration under the Delhi Sultans. The authors of Tariq were learned men, secretaries, administrators, poets and courtiers who both recounted events and advised rulers on governance, emphasizing the importance of just rule. The Circle of Justice. Fakhr-i-Mudabbir wrote in the 13th century, a king cannot survive without soldiers and soldiers cannot live without salaries. Salaries come from the revenue collected from peasants, but peasants can pay revenue only when they are prosperous and happy. This happens when the king promotes justice and honest governance. Keep the following additional details in mind. First, the author of Tariq lived in the cities, mainly Delhi, and hardly ever in villages. Second, they often wrote their histories for sultans in the hope of rich rewards. Third, these authors advised rulers on the need to preserve an ideal social order based on birthright and gender distinctions. Their ideas were not shared by everybody. In 1236, Sultan Iltutmish's daughter Rajia became sultan. The chronicler of the age, Minhaj-i-Siraz, recognized that she was more able and qualified than all her brothers, but he was not comfortable at having a queen as ruler, nor were the nobles happy at her attempts to rule independently. She was removed from the throne in 1240. What Minhaj-i-Siraz thought about Rajia? Minhaj-i-Siraz thought that the queen's rule went against the ideal social order created by God, in which women were supposed to be subordinate to men. He therefore asked in the register of God's creation, since her account did not fall under the column of men, how did she gain from all of her excellent qualities? On her inscriptions and coins, Rajia mentioned that she was the daughter of Sultan Iltutmish. This was in contrast to the Queen Rudramadevi 1262 to 1289 of the Kakatiya dynasty of Warangal, part of modern Andhra Pradesh. Rudramadevi changed her name on her inscription and pretended she was a man. Another Queen Dida ruled in Kashmir 980 to 1003. Her title is interesting. It comes from Didi or elder sister, an obviously affectionate term given to a loved ruler by her subjects. From garrison town to empire, the expansion of Delhi Sultanate. In the early 13th century, the control of the Delhi Sultans rarely went beyond heavily fortified towns occupied by garrisons. The sultans seldom controlled the hinterland of the cities and were therefore dependent upon trade, tribute, or plunder for supplies. Controlling garrison towns in the distant Bengal and Sindh from Delhi was extremely difficult. Rebellion, war, even bad weather could snap fragile communication routes. Delhi's authority was also challenged by Mongol invasions from Afghanistan and by governors who rebelled at any sign of the Sultan's weakness. The Sultanate barely survived these challenges. Its consolidation occurred during the reign of Ghiyasuddin Balban and further expansion under Alauddin Khilji and Muhammad Tughlaq. The first set of campaigns along the internal frontier of the Sultanate aimed at consolidating the hinterlands of the garrison towns. During these campaigns, forests were cleared in the Ganga Yamuna, Doab and hunter-gatherers and pastoralists expelled from their habitat. These lands were given to peasants and agriculture was encouraged. New fortresses, garrison towns and towns were established to protect trade routes and to promote regional trade. The second expansion occurred along the external frontier of the Sultanate. Military expeditions into southern India started during the reign of Alauddin Khilji and culminated with Muhammad Tughlaq. In their campaigns, Sultanate armies captured elephants, horses and slaves and carried away precious metals. By the end of Muhammad Tughlaq's reign, 150 years after somewhat humble beginnings, the armies of the Delhi Sultanate had marched across a large part of the subcontinent. They had defeated rival armies and seized cities. The Sultanate collected taxes from the peasantry and dispensed justice in its realm. But how complete and effective was its control over such a vast territory? The Masjid. A mosque is called a masjid in Arabic, literally a place where a Muslim prostrate in reverence to Allah. In a congregational mosque, masjid, a jami or jama masjid, Muslims read their prayers, namaz together. Members of the congregation choose the most respected learned male as their leader, imam, for the rituals of prayer. He also delivers the sermon, khutbah during the Friday prayers. During prayer, Muslims stand facing Makkah. In India, this is to the west. This is called the Qibla. The Delhi Sultans built several mosques in cities all over the subcontinent. These demonstrated their claims to be protectors of Islam and Muslims. Mosques also helped to create the sense of a community of believers who shared a belief system and a code of conduct. It was necessary to reinforce this idea of a community because Muslims came from a variety of backgrounds. A closer look: administration and consolidation under the Khilji and Tughlaqs. The consolidation of a kingdom as vast as the Delhi Sultanate needed reliable governors and administrators. Rather than appointing aristocrats and landed chieftains as governors, the early Delhi Sultans, especially Iltutmish, favored their special slaves purchased for military service called bandagan in Persian. They were carefully trained to man some of the most important political offices in the kingdom. Since they were totally dependent upon their master, the Sultan could trust and rely upon them. Slaves rather than sons. The sultans were advised, a slave whom one has brought up and promoted must be looked after for its need of whole lifetime, and good luck to find a worthy and experienced slave. Wise men have said that a worthy and experienced slave is better than a son. The Khaljis and Tughlaq continued to use bandagan and also raised people of humble birth who were often their clients to high political positions. They were appointed as generals and governors. However, this also introduced an element of political instability. Slaves and clients were loyal to their masters and patrons but not to their heirs. New sultans had their own servants. As a result, the accession of a new monarch often saw conflict between the old and the new nobility. The patronage of these humble people by the Delhi sultans also shocked many elites, and the authors of Persian Tariq criticized the Delhi sultans for appointing the low and base born to high offices. Officials of Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq. Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq appointed Aziz Khumar, a wine distiller, Firuz Hazzam, a barber, Manka Tabbak, a cook, and two gardeners, Lada and Pira, to high administrative posts. Ziauddin Barani, a mid-14th century chronicler, reported their appointments as a sign of the Sultan's loss of political judgment and his incapacity to rule. Like the earlier sultans, the Khilji and Tughlaq monarchs appointed military commanders as governors and territories of varying sizes. These lands were called Iqta and their holder was called Iqtadar or Mukti. The duty of the Muktis was to lead military campaigns and maintain law and order in their Iqtas. In exchange for their military service, the Muktis collected the revenues of their assignments as salary. They also paid their soldiers from these revenues. Control over Muktis was most effective if their office was not inheritable and if they were assigned Iqtas for a short period of time before being shifted. These harsh conditions of service were rigorously imposed during the reigns of Alauddin Khilji and Muhammad Tughlaq. Accountants were appointed by the state to check the amount of revenue collected by the Muktis. Care was taken that the Mukti collected only the taxes prescribed by the state and that he kept the required number of soldiers. As the Delhi Sultan brought the hinterland of the cities under their control, they forced the landed chieftains, the Samanta, aristocrats and rich landlords to accept their authority. Under Alauddin Khilji, the state brought the assessments and collections of land revenue under its own control. The rights of the local chieftains to levy taxes were cancelled and they were also forced to pay taxes. The Sultan's administrators measured the land and kept careful accounts. Some of the old chieftains and landlords served the Sultanate as revenue collectors and assessors. There were three types of taxes on cultivation called kharaj and amounting to about 50% of the peasant's producer, second on cattle and third on houses. It is important to remember that large parts of the subcontinent remained outside the control of the Delhi Sultans. It was difficult to control distant provinces like Bengal and Delhi, and soon after annexing southern India, the entire region became independent. Even in the Gangetic Plain, there were forested areas that Sultanate forces could not penetrate. Local chieftains stabilized their rule in these regions. Sometimes rulers like Alauddin Khilji and Muhammad Tughlaq could force their control in these areas, but only for a short duration. Chieftains and their fortification. Ibn Battuta, a 14th century traveler from Morocco, Africa, explained that chieftains sometimes fortified themselves in mountains, in rocky, uneven and rugged places, as well as in bamboo groves. In India, the bamboo is not hollow, it is big. Its several parts are so intertwined that even fire cannot affect them, and they are on the whole very strong. The chieftains live in these forests which serve them as ramparts, inside which are their cattle and their crops. There is also water for them within, that is rain water, which collects there. Hence they cannot be subdued except by powerful armies who, entering these forests, cut down the bamboos with specially prepared instruments. The Mongols under Genghis Khan invaded Transoxiana in northeast Iran in 1219 and the Delhi Sultanate faced their onslaught soon after. Mongol attacks on the Delhi Sultanate increased during the reign of Alauddin Khilji and in the early years of Muhammad Tughlaq's rule. This forced of two rulers to mobilize a large standing army in Delhi, which posed a huge administrative challenges. Let us see how the two sultans dealt with this. Alauddin Khilji and Muhammad Tughlaq. Alauddin Khilji. Delhi was attacked twice in 1299 or 1300 and 1302 to 1303. As a defensive measure, Alauddin Khilji raised a large standing army. Muhammad Tughlaq. The Sultanate was attacked in the early years of Muhammad Tughlaq's reign. The Mongol army was defeated. Muhammad Tughlaq was confident about the strength of his army and his resources to plan an attack on Transoxiana. He therefore raised a large standing army. Alauddin constructed a new garrison town named Siri for his soldiers. Muhammad Tughlaq, rather than constructing a new garrison town, the oldest of the four cities of Delhi, Kuana, was emptied of its residents and the soldiers garrisoned there. The residents of the old city were sent to the new capital of Daulatabad in the south, Alauddin Khilji. The soldiers had to be fed. This was done through the produce collected as tax from lands between the Ganga and Yamuna. Tax was fixed at 50% of the peasants' yield. Muhammad Tughlaq produce from the same area was collected as tax to feed the army, but to meet the expense of maintaining such a large number of soldiers, the Sultan levied additional taxes. This coincided with famine in the area. Alauddin Khilji. The soldiers had to be paid. Alauddin chose to pay his soldiers' salary in cash rather than iqtas. The soldiers would buy their supplies from the merchants in Delhi, and it was thus feared that merchants would raise their price. To stop this, Alauddin controlled the prices of goods in Delhi. Prices were carefully surveyed by officers, and merchants who did not sell at the prescribed rates were punished. Muhammad Tughlaq also paid his soldiers cash salaries, but instead of controlling prices, he used a token currency somewhat like present-day paper currency, but made out of cheap metals, not gold and silver. People in the 14th century did not trust these coins. They were very smart. They saved their gold and silver coins and paid all their taxes to the state with this token currency. This cheap currency could also be counterfeited easily. Alauddin's administrative measures were quite successful, and chroniclers praised his reign for its cheap prices and efficient supplies of goods in the market. He successfully withstood the threat of Mongol invasion. Muhammad Tughlaq's administrative measures were a failure. His campaign into Kashmir was a disaster. He then gave up his plans to invade Transoxiana and disbanded his large army. Meanwhile, his administrative measures created complications. The shifting of people to Daulatabad was resented. The raising of taxes and famine in the Ganga-Yamuna belt led to widespread rebellion, and finally the token currency had to be recalled. In this list of Muhammad Tughlaq's failures, we sometimes forget that for the first time in the history of the Sultanate, a Delhi Sultan planned a campaign to capture Mongol territory. Unlike Alauddin's defensive measures, Muhammad Tughlaq's measures were conceived as a part of a military offensive against the Mongols. The Sultanate in the 15th and 16th century. Take a look at Table 1 again. You will notice that after the Tughlaqs, the Sayyid and Lodi dynasties ruled from Delhi and Agra until 1526. By then, Jaunpur, Bengal, Malwa, Gujarat, Rajasthan and the entire South India had independent rulers who established flourishing states and prosperous capitals. This was also the period which saw the emergence of new ruling groups like the Afghans and the Rajputs. Some of the states established in this period were small but powerful and extremely well administered. Sher Shah Sur, 1540 to 1545, started his career as the manager of a small territory for his uncle in Bihar, and eventually challenged and defeated the Mughal Emperor Humayun, 1530 to 1540 and 1555 to 1556. Sher Shah captured Delhi and established his own dynasty. Although the Sur dynasty ruled for only 15 years, 1540 to 1555, it introduced an administration that borrowed elements from Alauddin Khilji and made them more efficient. Sher Shah's administration became the model followed by the great Emperor Akbar, 1556 to 1605, when he consolidated the Mughal Empire.